All right, let's dive right into this explainer and objectively unpack the sudden, dramatic collapse of the US-Iran ceasefire negotiations. We're looking at an incredibly tense geopolitical moment here, where an already fragile situation completely unraveled right before the world's eyes. So today, we're going to use the reported facts to understand exactly what happened, what was actually said, and why a highly anticipated diplomatic effort derailed so spectacularly.
80 minutes. Just think about that for a second. That is exactly how long it took for high-stakes international ceasefire negotiations to completely fall apart, with the Iranian delegation literally walking out of the room. I mean, in less time than it takes to watch a standard documentary, a major diplomatic effort aimed at securing peace just hit a massive wall. Every single time it feels like we might be making progress in this complex dynamic, we see a massive setback. And honestly, this 80-minute window perfectly encapsulates that volatility.
Part 1. The ceasefire talks collapse.
So to really understand how this all went down, we need to look at the immediate timeline of how this already fragile truce just suddenly derailed. We start with our baseline, right? A temporary truce is in place, and these negotiations are meant to solidify it. But almost immediately, President Donald Trump takes to Fox News and social media to issue some very severe warnings. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance is just moments away from physically stepping into the room to begin these critical discussions. And then, the collapse. Just 80 minutes in, the Iranian delegation walked out. According to Iranian state media, they left following what they characterized as a direct insult from the U.S. president.
Moving on to Part 2, Trump's public threats. Well, before the talks even really got off the ground, President Trump went on Fox News to outline some incredibly specific and severe warnings. He explicitly stated he would renew bombing on Iran. He even floated the idea of taking over the highly strategic Strait of Hormuz, and maybe even introducing tolls there if they couldn't reach an agreement. Plus, he tied the whole situation directly to Iranian proxies operating in Lebanon. You know, these definitely weren't your subtle diplomatic nudges. This was a highly public, multi-front pressure campaign being broadcast to the whole world right as the negotiations were supposed to be starting. And what's really wild is the absolute starkness of his warning about the Strait of Hormuz. It shows a highly aggressive public stance. During that Fox News interview, President Trump actually said he rang Iranian officials directly and told them not to close the Strait of Hormuz. His exact quote, as reported, was, "You close it, you won't have a country." That is absolute, uncompromising language delivered directly ahead of a high-stakes diplomatic negotiation.
Then he doubled down on social media, explicitly linking the continuation of the ceasefire to the actions of Iranian-backed proxies in Lebanon. The message was unmistakable, right? These negotiations weren't just about direct U.S.-Iran relations. They were entirely contingent on Iran's regional influence as well. The threat to hit Iran very hard again placed a massive, immediate condition on the very survival of the temporary truce.
Part 3, J.D. Vance's optimistic approach. Now, here's where it gets really fascinating. While those fierce threats were blasting out publicly, Vice President J.D. Vance was actually taking a surprisingly optimistic approach inside the diplomatic arena. He used phrases like turn over a new leaf and transform our relationship. This is classic diplomatic language aimed at de-escalation and long-term peace building, which obviously strikes a completely different chord than the warnings about bombings and shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Vance laid out a very clear, conditional path forward. He stated that abandoning nuclear ambitions would lead to a fundamentally transformed relationship. It was basically a step-by-step proposition. Step 1, Iran proves they're willing to give up their nuclear weapons ambitions for the long term. Step 2, in return, the United States is willing to fundamentally transform its relationship with the country. It was an offer of a major diplomatic reward, for sure, but it required a massive concession from Iran right up front, which is a historically immense hurdle given decades of deeply entrenched nuclear policy.
So we're basically looking at a highly complex dual messaging strategy coming from the U.S. You've got immediate, forceful ultimatums being delivered publicly, juxtaposed right against the promise of a transformed future delivered by the vice president just moments before entering the room. And honestly, the fact that the Iranian delegation walked out after just 80 minutes kind of suggests that navigating this massive contrast in messaging was just impossible at the negotiating table.
Part 4. A fragile, temporary truce.
Ultimately, we have to ask ourselves, what does this 80-minute collapse actually mean for the broader geopolitical landscape? What was actually lost when those negotiators walked out of the room? Well, the entire aim of these stalled negotiations was to take an already fragile temporary ceasefire and solidify it into a lasting agreement.
A temporary truce, by its very nature, is just a pause. It's like holding your breath. The objective here was to exhale, to create a permanent structure that would actually stop the cycle of threats and attacks. And that was the singular prize that just slipped away after an hour and 20 minutes. Because as this swift breakdown totally exposes, the two sides are just fundamentally far apart on the major issues driving the conflict. It's not just a matter of signing a piece of paper. As the rhetoric has shown us, they are clashing over the Strait of Hormuz, the actions of proxies in Lebanon, and long-term nuclear ambitions. These are deep-rooted, structural disagreements that don't just disappear overnight.
Which leaves us with one incredibly vital final question. Given this rapid collapse and the massive gap between the two nations, what is the realistic future of the ceasefire? When one side is offering to turn over a new leaf while simultaneously threatening that the other won't have a country, and the other side just walks away from the table after 80 minutes, citing insults, how does the international community ever bridge that gap? It's like a giant puzzle, and as we've seen today, the pieces are further apart than ever.